Welcome, friends. This video is entitled Pits, Dungeons, and Purity of Souls. We saw back in chapter 37 that the young Joseph most likely was spoiled by his special position in the family and proud of his dreams of greatness. God does not disdain him for this, and neither does he think badly or even critically towards us in our less than perfect spiritual condition. Rather, he sets into motion circumstances that are aimed at curing the problem. In Joseph's case, it was experiencing the treachery of his brothers, the pit, and being sold as a slave. This completely removes him from his former security where he was blinded to his own faults. He is now forced to deal with them. It is important to note that in spite of becoming a slave, that God was with Joseph. This is how the chapter begins in chapter 39. At the end of the chapter, Joseph is thrown into the dungeon, and again it is emphasized that God was with him. It is clear that terrible things are happening to Joseph, but at the same time, God is with him. As terrible as things were for Joseph, there is something that lies deeper than his afflictions, and that is the special presence of God. This little preposition "with" is loaded with spiritual importance. It belongs to the language of covenant. When God is in covenant with us, we are his people, and he is our God, and he walks along with us in our journey of life. This special presence is so real, so profound, and so powerful that it transforms suffering. In Joseph's case, he is sold as a slave. Rather than being defeated by despair, he's blessed by God, and all those around him are blessed. He is cast into a dungeon. Rather than giving up, he is blessed and transforms the dungeon. As real as suffering is, God's special presence, his being with us, is prior, because God is always bigger than our circumstances, whatever they may be. In all of this, God is purifying Joseph. Purification comes from within, and it comes from without. Purification from within refers to our own spirit, our own intentional building of the virtues through the spiritual discipline. We see in our story that Joseph kept himself pure with regard to Potiphar's wife. We are told that she offered herself to him daily, placing the young man in a constant state of temptation. Joseph had to deal not only with a woman who spared no expense in cosmetics and revealing attire, but also with the possibility of furthering his advancement if he yielded, and the potential disaster if he refused. The possibilities for sensual fulfillment and for rationalization were legion. Yet he did not yield. Both out of loyalty to his mastery, but what was more, out of fear of God. This places Joseph in direct contrast to his brother Judah and his uncle Esau, who had no fear of God in these matters, but followed the lower parts of their natures. Joseph emerges out of this episode as a master of his senses, rather than being mastered by them. Purification must also come from without, by which is meant the trials that come our way. completely out of our control, that are aimed at purifying us. We must do our own soul work, but there are always places where we cannot go, and God takes us there through external trials. Let me illustrate this with a story. Henry Suso was a monk who was very famous for his holiness. From 18 years of age until he was 40, he would discipline his body in a variety of ways so as to master his lower nature. One night, he had a vision where an angelic visitant told him that it was time for him to move on to a higher level and he didn't have to undergo these disciplines anymore. Freed from self-mortifications, he went about happily until he had another encounter where the visitant told him what this higher level would entail. This one informed Henry that in the past he was very selective in administering his self-mortifications, choosing those he felt were best and ceasing when he felt he had enough. Now, he must give up these self-ministrations and let God take over his purification. As it turned out, God brought great sufferings upon this man for 10 years, culminating in the total loss of his reputation. A wicked woman accused him before the whole community of fathering her child, which she abandoned. Another woman, out of pity for Henry, suggested that she murder the child so that the whole episode would pass by. Shocked at such a suggestion, he asked to see the child and was so compassionate toward it that the woman fell into great remorse for her heartlessness. When he saw this contrition, he gave this woman custody of the child at his expense. A relative offered to bump the slandering mother off a bridge into a river on a dark night. But Henry refused this as well. This sordid affair went on for a period of time, tormenting the sensitive soul of this poor monk until God saw fit to bring this woman to a sudden end. Only then did her lies become apparent, and Henry Suso was exonerated. This story displays an important pattern and sheds light on Joseph's ascent. Those who embrace the fact that they are in the darkness and began to long for the light and to encounter reality, capital R, the reality of God, began by spiritual instinct to purify themselves. This is the way of purgation or purification. Purification proceeds from within and from without. It proceeds from within in that the soul becomes motivated to reverse the natural domination of the senses and reason over the spirit. We find this to be the case with St. Paul, where he punished his body so as to enslave it. This, of course, is a metaphor spoken in context of athletic training and not an invitation to physical flagellation, as Henry Suso and a lot of the medieval monks practiced. We are speaking here of the classical disciplines of the Christian life, such as meditation, fasting, simplicity, and solitude. In all our zeal to become masters of our lower natures, however, we must ever be aware that God is the ultimate physician of the soul and applies his medicine to the soul from without. This takes the form of trials, such as Joseph's pit and dungeon. There are chambers deep within the soul, which we either would avoid out of self-love or have no idea that they even exist. Again, we are reminded of Henry Suso's story. All his self-mortifications during his early manhood brought him self-control. but also fame. Secretly, he held on to the one thing he could never let go: his reputation. God took over his purification and brought him down lower than he could ever take himself. We see a similar pattern with Joseph. He disciplined himself from within, yet he also was in need of discipline from without. In conclusion, we see that God is with us both in our own quest for purity by engaging the disciplines and in the trials that come our way. It is by grace that God motivates us to purity from within. And it is by grace that he purifies us by suffering in painful circumstances, transforming them into something far better than we could ever imagine. And let me conclude with the beatitude of our Lord Jesus. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. God bless you.